Our big guest by Fanatics is none other than NLL and ESPN broadcaster Brendan Glasheen. Thank you for joining the show, sir.
No problem. What's going on? Hope everything's good.
I'm awesome. I'm having
Good.
a great week of guests, including yourself. Nice shirt, by the way. I wish they had those that fit me, but anyways, regardless, great NLL.
They very well could. I mean, this is I got this a couple years ago, so
5X.
We'll see what we can do for you.
That's right. Hey, you had a great call on the Rock Bandits game, especially the final 45 seconds or so of game time. And I just want to say, if there was a call of the year, that would probably be it, in my opinion. How fun was that, dude?
Hectic, right? I mean, the last 2 weeks, myself, Mitch Belisle, and we had Ashley Miller on the floor with us in Buffalo. But our last 2 games of the week on ESPN, we had Colorado, San Diego 2 weeks ago. Phenomenal ending. Curtis Dixon walks it up, ends with the Dobie or the Austin Stott shot off the pipe, and then 4 shots on goal by 4 different players on Matt Vince. And I thought his stop on Craig, his final stop of the game that sealed it for Buffalo, was the best of the 4. Of course, it was the most notable, but yeah, it's exactly what you want, right? I think the league could not have had it any better in terms of the drama the last couple of weeks, in terms of the number 1 spot in the conference. The week before that, in Colorado, San Diego, who will meet again this weekend. You've got a playoff preview of an NLL West Finals rematch. So it was tons of fun. And in that moment, you just got to see it, call it. You got to stay on top of it, and it gets pretty hectic, I will admit. So I wish you see this a lot in other broadcast booths. Like Mitch and I are like holding each other back in terms of just trying to, you kind of black out, honestly, in the moment, but you're just on top of it. And it was great. It was a great game.
I don't know if you've seen that UFC GIF. I mean, I saw the match live, but like they're holding each other back.
Right, with John Anik. Yeah, exactly right. Yep. Yeah. And he's got, I don't know if I had quite the face like that, but yeah. Like you said, the difference between this game between Buffalo and Toronto and the game we did the previous week, when it came down to the final play, team trailing by 1 had the ball, was, like you said, to set it up, it was 45 seconds. And Schreiber had a great look. Corey Small had a great look, I thought, from up top. Keogh was right in front. They had all 4 shots. I thought Nick Rose outplayed Vince for the entirety of the game, for the full 60 minutes. But I thought the looks at the end in that final minute, Vince was unbelievably good. And
turn back the clock, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the NLL for you, right? I mean, coaches, GMs, they talk about it all the time. You need great goaltending to win in this league, and it's the timely saves too, right? It's like the argument about faceoffs too in the NLL too. Like, do you need a great all-time faceoff guy? It doesn't hurt, but you better get possessions at the end. And I thought Adler and Erlin were sort of close early, and then Erlin pulled away.
Yep.
And as we saw at the end, I mean, if the goaltender my point being is, if the goaltender stands on his head, possession sort of goes out the window, but it doesn't hurt. So it was a phenomenal game. A lot to unpack from it, for sure.
I love it. And I want to ask you about this, because what do you think stood out in the game to you that helped the Bandits have the edge? I know you talk about the Matt Vince saves at the end, but what to you was the key on why Buffalo was able to win this game?
I thought the fact that they had their full right side back.
Agreed. Yep.
For the first time all year, which in one breath you'd think Buffalo might need another week. They play Albany this weekend. They might need another week to sort of get acclimated. But I would counter that with, well, Toronto's had guys out of the lineup too. In Mitch DeSnoo, Greg Downing just got back in the lineup for them 2 weeks back. Keogh had just returned. So both teams very similarly had key pieces missing time. But for Buffalo, based on how they scored last year to this year, they took a bit of a step back, but they proved they could win close games differently. So their last 5 wins are from overtime, I think, or 4 of their last 5 wins have come thanks to overtime. But I felt like Dahoga was excellent.
Yes.
Fraser, of course, had the between the legs goal.
That was great.
I think a guy that doesn't get enough credit, and even talking to guys after the game, even Toronto's locker room, we bumped into Dan Dawson, who didn't play in the game, but Kyle Buchanan is an unsung hero, I think, for that team in terms of what he does. He's a water bug, loose ball guy that just creates other opportunities and those second chances to wear down a really good Toronto defense. So I thought getting their right side back, and Buffalo didn't panic going down. And I think it's because they knew they were going to have to adjust, and Toronto threw a lot at their right side. They threw a lot at Dane Smith early. Dane was sort of out of rhythm, I felt, early on in the game. But to be expected. I think great players know that going into a game, if you're really good and you're getting a lot of attention on you, it's because you're really good.
Right.
So I think Buffalo made adjustments as the game went on, and having that full right side, it wasn't all they've asked a ton of Dane Smith this year, a ton. So I know we're going to talk about MVP coming up. How can you argue if Dane got it again? In my opinion, how could you really? He's one of those guys. If you use the NBA comp, he should be in the discussion like a LeBron or a Giannis.
Agreed.
Every single year. But this year more than others because of the firepower they had out.
Agreed. That's what I'm thinking. Like they had Josh Bird missed 3 games. DeHoga's missed a bunch down the stretch, and they're still the 1 seed ho-hum.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. Yep.
To your point about Kyle Buchanan, I think he won one of their team awards for most unsung hero or whatever that award was. So you're right about that. He's been great. I want to get to Dane Smith because I want to get to your MVP talk here and who is your MVP, because in that game, to me, Dane Smith, you said, was out of rhythm, but I love his defense after they would miss, hacking away, setting the tone. And I was like, this is insane.
Yeah.
Was that to you like an MVP statement? And who are you on the Christian Del Bianco train? Who's your MVP?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good point to bring up about Dane, because that's unfair to say he was complete. That's how he stayed in rhythm, right? Because if he's not racking up a typical day at the office, 3 and 4 or 2 and 5, 2 goals, 5 assists, 3 goals, 4 assists, like that kind of another day at the office kind of game. But you make a great point that his commitment, and John Tavares told us this in our call leading up to the game, his commitment to both ends has been remarkable. And you're right. He made plays to prevent Toronto trying to get the ball out of their own zone and clear it. Dane was not making that easy. And in a few cases, he caused some turnovers, and that is a great call out there. That I think that's why what makes him great is that's what kept him very engaged in the game. So to answer your question about MVP, we know this weekend if Dane Smith scores 12 points, he'll top his own record from 2016, in which he won MVP for single points in a single season by an NLL player. Jeff Teat also has 126.
Right.
It's so hard, man. What Connor Fields has done for Rochester has been remarkable. For sure. And the other thing is on that front, and this is no disrespect to Hartley at all, because it's not fair to Hartley to put him in the same conversation with Nick Rose and Matt Vince, but to see the kind of year Roch has had, considering that they brought in this guy who was sort of a depth piece in Buffalo. Connor Fields has been unleashed in Rochester. But he's been their best. He's been a great story, and I think reminded folks as to why he was a lottery pick and why, indeed, even being an expansion, the fact Vegas traded him and he didn't think anything of it. So he bounced around. He's now, but this is technically because he got picked by Vegas in the expansion draft. It's his 4th team.
Wow.
San Diego, Buffalo, Vegas for a cup of coffee, and Rochester
for a cup of coffee.
And he's embraced all of it. And credit to Mike Hazen and that staff. And Dan Craig as well, their GM, how they've or Dan Carey, how they've done a really good job of just utilizing him and making him the guy. So I haven't given you a pick yet. That's kind of what I'm avoiding.
Hey, Del Bianco, are you abiding the 19 assist thing? Because I'm not.
Yeah, he's he's one of their top 10 scorers, which is insane. Yeah, he's a great call out, and that's why, like, if you have to keep going back and forth on Dane Smith, Tom Schreiber, Connor Fields, maybe you do lean defense in a year in which there's been so many 1-goal games and it's that close. Do you have a debate between Del Bianco and Nick Rose and Del Bianco, considering all that? So Connor Fields picks up. We find out a new layer of his game in a new place, and we find out what Del Bianco can do and put the team on his back when a lot of firepower on their offense goes out the door. And Jesse King's had a phenomenal year.
Yep.
They've won with goaltending and defense, though, and they've basically this is Christian Del Bianco's team. They're in contention for the 1 seed. It's not a bad call. I wouldn't be against it. I guess I'm trying to tell you guys that who would win it. It's as close of a year as I can remember.
I love it for the league, like the great games and the MVP conversation. That's what fans like to talk about.
Yeah.
So I love it.
And I hate, and this is I don't want to leave Jeff Teed out because he's had a phenomenal season, reigning rookie of the year, 126 points, just like Danes, but they don't have the W's. I mean, that's, to me, and that's not all on him, right? Like you need to have you need a balanced, talented group across the board, both offense, defense, goaltending. You need all of it. So he's had a great year. There's often that debate who had the best season and then who won the MVP.
Right.
And the same arguments I made for Dane and what he's had to work with guys out. Bird had been out, DeHoga, Fraser. Tom Schreiber's had that too, with a newer looking offense. And he's had he like Connor Fields, Schreiber and Fields have had breakout seasons. And it takes a few years to acclimate your indoor skill set and let it flourish in the indoor game. When you come from a mostly field background, it does take a couple years. And I think both of those guys in Fields and Schreiber have found their footing. So there's we just talked about it. There's like 5 guys who could win it, and you really can't argue with it.
I like that point. Do they give you a vote? Or
I don't think so. I don't think so. No, seriously, I don't remember because we didn't have a season. Well, we had a season last year, but we didn't have one the year before that. I don't think so.
Okay.
I think coaches and GMs and other players get votes, but media, I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. I don't know. I haven't seen anything yet, so it hasn't come across my desk.
Hey, if I had one, I'm going with Dane Smith. But you have to nitpick these things, and like you said, anybody can win it. We shouldn't be mad.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
And we haven't said a thing about San Diego, and I feel guilty because they've had a great year too. They've mixed and matched goaltending, but how do you pick one out of all their firepower?
I agree with that too.
Like they've had, and you know what? Another thing too about Buffalo is if you go back and look at all those goals they scored in those overtimes, it's a different guy every time,
which is insane.
Right. So yeah, you add all that up. If I'm going to say all this about Buffalo and their depth and leave San Diego out, maybe that omits Dane Smith from the conversation, but San Diego's just had a different kind of, they've had, Westberg should be in the conversation too, truly, because he's had an unbelievable year coming over. And you could add that Berg's comfortability and execution in that offense, they've set him up in great spots to shoot the ball, because you have to dedicate so much attention to Doby and Dixon and Stotts. But you can make that case about any one of those individuals elsewhere. But Burr, I think of all guys, though, in San Diego, talking to we talked to Patrick Merrill, their coach, back when we did their game at Colorado a few weeks back. He felt that he's been sort of left out of the conversation. So I think Westberg definitely deserves a shout there, too, because they are the number one team in the West, and they deserve that recognition.
There's I believe there's 2 players in the NLL that I found out that have 100 points and 10 cost turnovers. It's Dane and it's West, to your point.
So what was that stat again?
Only 2 players with 100 points and 10 cost turnovers.
Westberg and Dane Smith. Wow.
Yep. That's to your point. And I wanted to ask you this last question because
quickly, if I had a second half MVP, the kid Dobson in Georgia.
Thank you.
Now Lyle deserves a lot of credit. I know Q's had a breakout year
Right.
in that offense. It revolves around Lyle. Lyle makes that buzzsaw work.
Oh, yeah.
He's the straw that stirs the drink. It's why they could plug and play anybody. Lyle's a guy if you had to build your team around someone who goes first in that kind of voting or draft.
Right.
And I think Lyle goes 1. Dane's close. I would still take Lyle because I think Lyle can work with any interchangeable parts. But just want to give Georgia that shout out but they started 0-7, so their turnaround has been remarkable. I know they lost last week to Roch, but Georgia gets in. Pretty phenomenal story there too.
I agree. I think I agree with that. I completely agree with Brett Dobson and the whole crew over there. I went to one. That was the only game I went to this year. So live in Savannah. There you go. I want to ask you this last question because it's about the best team. You mentioned San Diego. To me, they've been too inconsistent, as great as their record is. Who is the best team that maybe you've got a chance to call this year?
Wow, that is a tough one. I think. I haven't seen Calgary, and they.
Okay.
I feel like that's unfair to not. I want to mention that caveat before I continue. I have not seen Calgary in person this year. They've looked, but just watching from afar. Like I watched their game Friday, or I watched back the highlights, and like we just talked about with Del Bianco and how they've figured it out offensively.
On the road, yeah.
And on the road, they've been exceptional. I know Toronto just lost, but they're really complete. Agreed. They're balanced. They're very balanced. You don't know. They can win any kind of game, which I think Buffalo would argue they could too this year. I think Buffalo, maybe last year, not the case. They had to score a lot. And that's not a knock on Vince. I just think they were just the way they were built. They were just built more with more firepower, and they want to outscore you and score 15-17 a night. But what does worry me about Toronto is if they don't score in transition, is Schreiber at a point now where we talked to Matt Sawyer during the week leading up to the game, and he said first half of the year, 75% of our offense was give the ball to Tom, keep it in his stick, and just create. And I like Corey Small's game. Corey Small, when he was in Buffalo the year they went to the finals in 2019, Corey Small, to me, at this stage of his career, is great when he's your third or fourth option, maybe even fifth option. But I think right now in their 5-on-5, after Schreiber, so I say all that, but I think they're lethal enough that in a win 2 out of 3 with Rose in the goal, they're kind of a gauntlet defensively. Like I think their speed, their athleticism, their balance. I do, and when you get to playoff time, as we just hit on, goaltending and defense to me matter a lot more than how many goals and you got to score more goals than the other team. I realize that. But I think the way that Toronto has played, they can kind of win any kind of game.
It's going to get ugly.
Yeah. But as I say all that, because you asked me what the best team is.
Right.
But Buffalo getting home floor advantage in a conference final, if those two meet again, that proved to be very important in terms of tone setting, win that first one in your home building, which as we found out in the finals, that didn't even matter because Colorado went down 1-0 and then won the next 2. The league's so close, man. When you cover a league with 15 teams, there should be 10 really good teams. And I think this year there are probably 7 or 8 that are pretty good, but I think home floor matters at this stage for sure. So to answer your question, I think Toronto's been the most. I saw Toronto win at Albany in a kind of a grinded out, uncharacteristic, grinded out style, not having their best night. But I think teams that don't have their best nights that still find a way are impressive.
Hey, in Albany, I know they have a bad record. They've been tough.
Yeah.
They're not a pushover. I like that. And Vegas won 5 games, to your point about parity. They won 5 games. They weren't even supposed to win 2. So there you go.
Well, I would say this too about Albany. Like, keep in mind, since they hired Glenn Clark in the so his rookie year was 15-16.
Right.
Of all the teams in the East, with the exceptions being New York, Philly, and Halifax, because Halifax, the old Rochester. My point being is, since Clark was hired, until this year, any teams till now, until of course this year, New England, Albany had been the only organization that hadn't missed the playoffs.
Good point.
Until this year. So every year Clark has been their coach, they've got in until this year. So kind of a reset year. They've got a lot of great young draft picks coming in. Like a lot of teams, Albany's had more injuries that have ended seasons, like Nardella, Nishimura, Kieran McCardle, Charlie Kitchen. Those have been tough for sure. But yeah, I like Buffalo a couple years ago had a really bad record. Reset year. They drafted Josh Byrne. Rochester out of the playoffs last couple of years. 2 really horrendous records. Now they're in it again. So I think it's fair to keep in mind that a lot of these teams at the top of the league, Toronto had really early on in Clark's tenure starting in Albany and New England. Toronto had a bad year, but got kind of retooled and reset. They drafted Chow and Rogers. Right. Albany not only has a great draft class from last year, being a playoff team, but they're in a position possibly to get the number 1 pick, and they'll have a comp pick as well at the end of the first round for Resetaritz. So all that being said, every one of these teams now at the top of the league, and of course San Diego was an expansion team. Calgary's been probably the most consistent despite what they've lost. They've kind of maintained, they've stayed above water, which is
culture,
what makes their program really impressive, what Malowski and company have done there. But my overall point being is every really good team in this league has had a kind of a down year or a reset year. And it's been uncharacteristic for sure. I mean, Brett Manny hasn't been on a losing team like this in his tenure. Clarky tells us all the time, I've been in this league now for 35. He's been in lacrosse now for 35 years. He's, as a player and a coach, he's never had a year like this. So
wow.
Ever as a player in Toronto, he won. A lot of coaches in this league played in Toronto and won with Toronto. Yeah. So I think what's the cliche? What's the saying? You take 1 step back to take 2 steps forward. I think that's the mindset right now. And Dougie Jamieson had a bad stretch.
Insane.
He had a bad stretch for about close to 4 or 5 weeks. January, February, got out of that rut. He's played really well the last 2 months. So just kind of a too little, too late situation. And they were right there with Philly last Sunday. It was a great lacrosse game.
That was a good one as well. I mean, Philly almost lost their season on that one. So there you go.
Yeah. So it's been good. I mean, the games are tight, and I think, but no surprise. I mean, to me, seeing the top of the league with Buffalo and Toronto in it, Rochester being back in is a good story. I think Rochester being good is good for the league.
Agreed.
And we'll see what happens out west. That first round dynamic of one single game a limb is dangerous.
Colorado and Panther City are no pushover.
I would agree. Colorado beat San Diego a few weeks ago.
Yep. Now
it was at Colorado. This game coming up this weekend is in Pechanga Arena, so that could change things. But we'll see. It should be good.
Do you have any playoff games on ESPN for yourself coming up?
We don't know yet. We're still kind of working out the schedule. A lot of it depends on geography.
Oh wow.
Well, just because TSN might do some games, so we're not entirely sure yet. It still kind of has to shake out here, and what it depends on TV time availability too. We'll see.
I'm looking forward to your call either way. That's all I know.
Thanks, man.
Thanks so much, and again, great job on the Rock Bandits game. Enjoy the playoffs. Enjoy the rest of the season. Brendan, we got to have you on again. That was awesome, dude.
Thanks, man. Yeah, definitely into it. You do a great job with this. I've heard nothing but great things. So, Mike, keep it going, all right?
Wow. Okay, cool. I appreciate that.
Now, we'll work on that shirt, okay? We'll work on the shirt.
I'll get a little patch.
That works, too. My fiance is a designer. She can maybe whip it up for you, and we'll slap it right on there, and you'll be fine.
We'll figure it out. Hey, man, have a good one.
You too. All right.